Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another HR Talk Wednesday webinar. I hope you can hear me okay and that you can see the presentation. I understand that in the last 2 weeks we've had a bit of a challenge with our internet in our Durban office, which we're working on fixing, but hopefully today everything goes a bit smoother. My name is Jonty Aitken, and I also have my colleague Nicky Hardwick on the call. I'm going to be doing most of the talking today. But I have Nicky available because she spends a lot of time with clients, and when we get to the difficult questions, I'm sure she'll be better able to answer things than I will. Great to see on our attendees list a lot of old friends, clients of ours, people I haven't seen for a while. Thank you very much for joining. We really appreciate your support. If we just remind ourselves for a second why we do these webinars, and particularly why we make them free. One, we like to give you an idea of trends in the market across the entire HR and payroll space, just to give you an idea of what's happening, try and educate you, give you an idea of different things that are changing and how legislative authorities are moving and doing things differently. But I think the most important reason is we want to make HR great in your organization, and we want to, if you can go away from one of these webinars and say, that's a great idea, maybe we can do that a little bit differently, then the webinar is a success. Candice, we all good? Sorry, is that some people struggling to get in?
No, we're all good. Somebody just has a sound issue.
Okay, so if you can take away one idea from these things, then that's fantastic. And then even better, if you can use HR Talk as a service provider to make things happen, then that is even better for us. So evolution of employee benefits is the topic for today. So we'll get into that very shortly. So just first of all, disclaimer and disclosure. So HR Talk has a financial services business, which is a registered financial services provider. So usual indemnity applies here. That said, we're not really going to be talking about specific employee benefit products today. So a lot of what we're talking about today is much more general. It's thinking about where employee benefits have come from in the past. Why do they come in the first place? Think about how they've evolved in our society, and hopefully to think about things a little bit differently in your own organization, to say, well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should think about that as it pertains specifically to your business. So let's start by talking about the history. Okay, so the first pensions came in as far back as ancient Rome, where soldiers served. So I think Emperor Augustus, soldiers served for about 25 years in the army, and they then got a relatively good pension payment every month or every year, plus they sometimes got a piece of land. Then not much happened for a long period of time. There were some pensions that were provided to staff of the East India Company and the Bank of England in the 18th century. But a lot of that was for the more well-off in society. And then we had a very interesting case in 1850 where Scottish Widows was launched. And this was predominantly driven by firefighters, I think, who were in Edinburgh, where what would happen is if one of these firefighters died on the job, the problem was that their wife and kids would then be destitute. They'd then be forced out of wherever they were staying, and often into the worst possible circumstances. So colleagues banded together to put money in a fund that they could then use to help support these wives and kids of any of their colleagues that died during a firefighting. And then the first modern government pension was launched in 1889 in Germany. And so we then have a situation where, as we get into modern times, we've got both this concept of public and private pensions. Okay, and I'm looking at pensions because they were really the precursor to our modern employee benefits. If we then look at South Africa's more recent history, so pre-1994, obviously we had very limited insurance products across the entire population. Okay, so it was very much restricted to the white population prior to 1994. And then post that, we've had a number of state-sponsored employee benefit type operations. So we've got UIF, Compensation Fund, we've got the Basic Condition of Employment and Labour Relations Act, which set out the basic legislative requirements to look after employees and collective bargaining and all the rest. And we obviously have the Government Employees Pension Fund. Within the private sector, we obviously have had an increase in the number of offerings, number of insurance companies out there offering different things, from medical aid to health insurance, the retirement funding industry, and all sorts of other options that are now available in the private sector. Unions have played a part. Okay, so while they're not always offering a collective scheme, they've had quite a big impact on labor laws, which then has an impact on effectively employee benefits. So, for example, on making sure that paternity leave is consistent with maternity leave, and pushing through some of these things within our society. And then bargaining councils also have had a part to play, offering various different employee benefits to their members industry-wide within that particular, across the industry for that particular sector that's covered by the bargaining council, looking at wage, minimum wage, leave requirements, pensions, health, sick pay funds, etc. The more interesting thing as we look at this history is obviously then we've got this big thing that's coming in NHI. So we're very uncertain exactly how this whole marketplace is going to look in the next 5, 10, 15 years. NHI is going to obviously have a big impact on insurers, depending on how it rolls out. The purpose of today is not to really go into that. Okay, so I'm just putting that there as a question mark, because the whole landscape is likely to change on the back of that. Traditionally, why have employers had these benefits? Okay, because the why is very important. This question why is actually quite an important one for all organizations. If you do have a chance, there's a guy called Simon Sinek who brought in the concept in the early 2000s of the golden circle, which looked at why is the most important question of why we do things in an organization more important than how we do it or what we do. Okay, so if you do have a chance, go and have a look at that. I think it's quite an important thing in terms of thinking about the underlying reasons for us doing things in an organization. So why do we usually have these employee benefits? There's a concept of a healthy workforce is critical, less lost time. It's morally better to have benefits for our employees. In certain instances, it saves costs overall. And importantly, it improves our employee retention. Okay, so this has a lot been what we traditionally looked at for employee benefits. Despite that, we've tended to have a disparity between what we'd have for white collar versus blue collar. Okay, so let's look at the types of occasions when an employee might have your traditional employee benefits. So when they're sick, white collar would tend to be covered by private hospital and medical aid. Okay, blue collar would what we tend to see tends to be under insured or have less employee benefits because of the cost. Okay, so they obviously have to go to a state hospital and clinics, limited access to chronic medication, although some of the health insurance products are out there actually can help resolve some of that lack of cover. When somebody's sick for a long time and unable to work, we've got income disability cover. Okay, and for blue collar workers, they would rely on government social grants. When injured on duty, white collar have insurance cover, blue collar we'd have to rely on employed. When disabled, we'd have income disability cover for white collar, and once again, blue collar would have to rely on social grants. When retired, white collar would often have a retirement fund. Blue collar workers often would then need to rely on their family unless they are working for an employer that's got some form of post-retirement benefit for them. And when somebody passes away, obviously white collar have a funeral cover. Blue collar, it depends. Many companies do offer funeral cover, and it has been quite common for individuals to take out funeral cover. So I think out of many of the insurance products out there, funeral insurance has probably been one that's actually been disseminated across more of society than others. But there is a disparity between the white collar versus blue collar in terms of the existing traditional employee benefits product. So that's really an overview of the traditional stuff where we've thought about employee benefits, majority of it from insurance companies or pension funds, where we look at things that are provided by specific service providers in the industry. As we look to the evolution of employee benefits, and this is not a new thing, but I think I'd like you just to think about this a little bit more holistically. There's this key concept of going, employee benefits are not just about insurance products. Okay, it's in the name. Why do we have employee benefits? It's a benefit to the employee that is serving a particular purpose. So as we look at the evolution, let's not consider employee benefits as just those insurance products or post-retirement benefits, disability, dread, health insurance, whatever it might be. Actually, there's an important evolution here, which is, why do we actually, as an organization, want to provide employee benefits to our employees? Okay, and that's the starting point. Now, some of the things that we would look at is, how do we retain the best staff? Okay, so what would be attractive for that key staff, and how do I get, what would they look at and say, well, if I'm making a decision between staying with HR Talk versus another company, this is definitely something that's worthwhile for me. Why should they work for us? How do we get the most from our staff? Okay, so how do I make my staff more efficient? We do a lot of work with clients where we're looking at their payroll cost, and it's 30 to 40% of the cost in their business. Yet apart from headcount, they do very little else to try and improve the efficiency of their workforce. They're almost taking that 30, 40% cost as a given. And they go, well, the only thing I can do is change headcount. But actually, it seems counterintuitive. If they looked at any other costs in their business, they would be doing a lot more work around how do they manage that more effectively. How do we encourage the right behavior of staff? What relationship do we want to have with our staff, and how do we want our staff to promote our business? Now, these might seem like wishy-washy concepts, but the idea of building a benefits package to drive this behavior, or to make our business different to our competitors so that it's more attractive and that it gets more out of our people and it makes our people happier, is actually very important in terms of designing an overall employee benefits package. And some of the examples, which I'll go into shortly, are things like flexible working, additional leave, supported training, but I'll go into a bit more detail on my next slide. The key thing here is that it's different for each employer. So we can't go into a logistics business or a mining company and say, here's a standard package for you. We need to understand, what is it that you as an organization are trying to do? What's your business strategy? How does your HR strategy tie into that business strategy? So if you're saying to me that you're an innovation business, okay, and that's very important for you to be good at innovation and to change, well, how are you structuring your packages to attract the right people, the people that are problem solvers, that are going to be able to innovate for you? Okay, so it's quite important to have the why question answered for your business in order to say, okay, well, let's decide then what package we want to have. And it's no point going, okay, well, I want to be like the best employer who offers all of these different things, because that might not work for your business. Okay, and there's always a cost-benefit analysis to look at and say, actually, what are the things I can do simply because, it's what we do, but actually might make a huge difference for our employees. It doesn't always have to be a big cost to you. So if we look at some examples, okay, and some of these examples, actually, the insurance companies are great at structuring these things for you. And a good example for that is a deferred compensation scheme. Okay, so if we look at remuneration, we might have our basic remuneration in the business, okay, which covers a lot of different things, including the standard employee benefits like your post-retirement benefits, your income, disability, dread, group life, whatever it might be. And you might have a bonus that you pay at the end of each year, and you might have a long-term incentive plan which is aimed at your top exec management. But there are also, for example, some nice products out there which allow you to retain staff by making, going to an insurance company and designing a product that goes, Mr. Employee or Mrs. Employee, here's a benefit that will pay out to you conditional on the future employment at the company. Okay, so effectively it's in your name, okay, but there's certain conditions that need to be met. And what that means is you have a almost a longer term structure that you can use for people outside the exec. It may even be for people, let's just go back to that innovation example, that encourages those people to stay with you or to meet certain targets, that is not driven by whether the business is now doing well, because you're effectively paying a premium to an insurance company to then make sure that they get that benefit, provided they're still employed with the company. Okay, so there's some things that you can structure here that might be aimed at different parts of your business. Okay, the flexible working from home, childcare support, fun offices, you could have in place to attract specific talent. Okay, now there's a whole lot of literature that is now available on the working from home and the challenges with it. And we know that a lot of employers are bringing people back into the business, particularly new employees. So I'm not saying that these are things that you need to do in its entirety. Think about what works for your business and why you're trying to do it. Okay, what are fun offices? They're the ones with foosball tables and, funny meeting rooms and sleep pods or whatever you might want to look at. And some of the American companies have really taken it to the next extreme. But this is really about saying, can you make the office a better place to work? If you want to attract people in the right way, childcare support might be something that you can do relatively easily, for example. Okay, and that is going to make it so that your employees are much happier coming to work, because they know that the big worry in their mind about not looking after their young kid is dealt with in a safe environment. Professional development allowance. Okay, so you might have a policy where you support future studies when a person has met specific conditions. Okay, it encourages development, encourages people to stay with you. It makes employees believe that you actually are interested in their growth as an individual. We can look at different leave options. So some organizations would have a sabbatical after 20 years service or whatever it might be, where it's, you can take a sabbatical. We don't mind if you take a sabbatical, because we know it's actually quite good for you. It's quite good for you to take a break, to get new ideas, to go and rest and recover, knowing that you'll come back to our organization rather than just leaving us because you are burnt out or, you just need some time. Or it might be that you offer additional leave incentives where employees hit certain targets or in certain circumstances. You could look at mental health and employee well-being interactions. So shop floor meetings. Okay, it's not just about lip service to health and safety. It's recognizing that, a healthy workforce is very important. So maybe there's the opportunity to have interactions on the shop floor with our staff, where we talk to them about some of the things that they might be seeing in the news that might be stressing them out. Particularly in South Africa, about mental health issues. Okay, we know it's a massive issue. We know that South Africans are under huge pressure. I mean, anybody in Joburg going through the traffic and the traffic lights that are out and the potholes and all the rest, by the time they get to work, they are under huge stress. Okay, so how do we, as an employer, have these things where we start to talk about these things and about ways for people to create coping mechanisms? There are some great products out there from the insurance companies where you can get access to a employee assistance program. Okay, but just because an employee's got access to it doesn't mean that people take advantage of that. So this is not just about having it available. It's also about encouraging people and reminding them that there's an employee assistance program there, and they can phone in if they've got a legal issue or if they're struggling financially, and they've got somebody to talk to. Okay, it's not just about lip service to this. It's about, okay, so why are we doing this? We're doing this to encourage or to look after our staff. So we've got the mechanism in place there, but how do we then make sure that our staff utilize it? I cannot tell you how many times we see an employer roll out something. They roll out a system, they roll out a particular product. And at that time, the employee doesn't, they think, oh, this is interesting, whatever, but they don't need it then. 2 years later, they do need it, but they've forgotten that the employer has it. They've forgotten they've got access to it. And so they go and, they take a couple of days sick leave and they go and stand in line at a clinic, not realizing that actually the employees are already catered for this, but because they don't have a regular communication around it, they've forgotten about it. They don't realize that they could have had the support and they could have had a very positive view of the employer, but just because we need to keep reminding people about these things. so they have it top of mind. Travel to work options. Okay. Got to consider the risk around this and all the rest, but for employee safety. Okay, if employees are having to come through, and this obviously doesn't work for everybody, but if they're having to run the gauntlet every day to get to work, and we know that this is causing difficulties for them, and we think there's an option for us to actually organize safe travel to work, that may have a massive impact on those employees' lives for something that is relatively easy for us to organize. And then there's some culturally specific options. Okay, so looking at, what are some of the cultures within our organization? What are some of the different religious beliefs? How can we make the employee realize that we care in that respect? Okay, not a good example here, but I worked in one organization where Christmas was a big thing for them, and literally every staff member got a turkey or a chicken at Christmas because it was something that they wanted to do. Now, please be careful of that, because we've got to be aware of discrimination between different religious beliefs. So careful when you do that. But it might be that you are saying to employees in your organization, we respect your beliefs. Here's some of the things that we do to recognize that you might be fasting at the moment, or to recognize the different places that you come from and the different things that you believe. Okay. Why? Because as an employer, we care. Okay. And we think that this is important for us as an employer identity. So this is not an exhaustive list, but you can see there are a lot of different things on here that you could think about implementing in your organization that get you a closer connection with your employees and give you a closer feedback loop on different things. Okay, so I come back to that mental health and employee well-being interactions. It allows you to get a feedback loop on how staff are feeling. Okay, a session where you encourage feedback not just on how people are doing their job or what operation they need to do, but more about them as individuals. Gives you a much better feel for, are people happy? Are they not happy? You can send out a staff survey and not get any feedback. Okay, these sort of sessions where you're encouraging people to talk actually gives you sometimes more effective feedback. Some common issues we often see. Okay. Can't afford it. My employees can't afford it. I pay the bargaining council for this. So, if I've got bargaining council employees, I actually don't even get involved with those employees because, I'm forced to pay all these things. So it actually doesn't mean anything for me. This is government's job, or it's not in my control. Okay, so we see all of these things. And for each and every one of them, there's actually a good thing that there are ways through this. So I can't afford, or my employees can't afford it. Okay, so I'll give you a good example of this. We often get employers coming to us and saying, I'd love to offer the standard post-retirement benefits and medical aid and all the rest and health insurance, but I can't afford to add to my payroll cost. Or my employees don't want to, they don't want to take the deduction for these things. Okay, so an example there of what we do is if they're on a cost to company, so we can move an employer onto a cost to company. Okay. And then you can offer the choice to your employees and say, listen, we're not going to change your package, but you've got the option of then electing to go onto the post-retirement benefit or the health insurance. And yes, you'll take home less at the end of the day, but you've got the choice, okay, depending on how you want to look after your family. And then for new employees, you'd obviously make it mandatory, and particularly for the post-retirement benefits, that's actually a mandatory requirement under the Pension Funds Act. But there are ways to manage it. Or when you get to increased time, you could say, listen, guys, we were proposing an increase. What we're going to do is we're going to not change your basic, but we're going to implement these post-retirement benefits or these various insurance products so that you actually have an additional benefit that is akin to getting whatever increase we would have given you. Okay, so overall, you've still got that increase, but there's no real impact on your take-home pay. So that might work better for some organizations. I pay the bargaining council for this. Yeah, the bargaining councils have a place. But it might be that you look at that and you go, okay, I'm in an industry where everybody's covered by that bargaining council. So let's just talk about some of the logistics businesses. They lose drivers overnight. The drivers move from one employer to the next. Why? Because the guys are going into a slightly different grade or whatever. There's very little difference between the employers because they're just been drivers. So how do you, as the logistics company, go, how do I keep my good drivers? There must be I need to do something else to make it more attractive to work for me than for my competitor. And the only way I can do that is by doing things differently to the straight bargaining council. So that's the basic. But what else can I do? And it doesn't always have to be pay related. Okay, there's another fallacy that's out there that incentivizing employees is all about pay. Okay, it was a great study done, I think it was about 30 years ago, where they did a study and they looked at various different focus groups, brought them in, and some they gave a once off incentive for doing something. Others they gave a bigger incentive, smaller incentives, and they had other things where they looked at making the task that they were doing no incentive but an interesting task. And they found that the problem with incentives that they tend to be short-term in nature from a performance perspective. And that sometimes employees get a lot more value from something that is interesting, okay, where they feel like they've achieved something important in doing their task, and they get the kudos or approval at the end of the process. So remember that incentivization is also quite a big field in terms of looking at your workforce and saying what actually works for the type of people we have working for us. And it's not always about pay. This is government's job. Okay, look, we know there's some challenges in our public sector in South Africa. But even if you look at, for example, the UK or Europe, there's a moral hazard associated with the situation where you get a social security net where there's no incentive for somebody to do anything. So, and it then becomes a cost to society. So nowhere's perfect where you can just rely on and say, it's not my problem. Nor does that create a situation where your workforce looks at your organization and says, I don't want to leave this place, okay, because they really look after us. And the final one is not in my control. Okay, we get so many employers coming to us and saying, there's nothing I can do about sick leave in South Africa. Okay, an employee can come to me with a sick note that they would have got from anybody. There's nothing we can do. Okay, and to be honest, we've had a situation where we've had a sick note for lactic acid buildup because the guy went to gym. So yes, you can get a sick note for pretty much anything. However, we don't agree that you can't control sick leave. The worst possible situation you can be in with sick leave is to basically go, we're not doing anything because we can't touch it, because then it becomes a problem area. But what we do, for example, in terms of managing this, is we use sick leave and annual leave patterns as an indicator of where we have underperforming employees. So we have organizations where they have branches all over the country. We look at the annual leave and sick leave patterns, and HR can then go and say to the manager of that local branch and say, what's happening with Jonty? We see that things are a little bit funny here. Can you tell us what's happening? And 80% of the time, the employee's probably fine. But there will be occasions when that manager goes, yes, and I'm meant to do something. He's been underperforming, but I just haven't got around to it. And then suddenly HR look like heroes because they are proactively finding and using leave patterns to identify employees where an intervention is necessary. Okay, so please, none of these things mean that you can't look after any of these things or there are reasons not to put in place these employee benefits. So in closing, and open things up to questions, what we wanted to get across today is this idea that so employee benefits is not just about the post-retirement benefits, the income, the insurance policies that you have in place, the dread group life, whatever it is that you have as standard package items for employees. With the evolution of employee benefits, it's anything where an employee gets a benefit by working for you. And the advantage here is that there's quite a lot of flexibility for employers to design something that works for them, that differentiates their organization. Okay, that makes it, or that's important, or allows them to attract the right staff and to retain the right staff. Because the cost of a high staff turnover and losing your key people is prohibitive. So imagine a situation where you have an organization where things are too easy. You don't keep your top staff because they feel frustrated, and you end up with just mediocrity. Okay, and we don't have anything in place to try and get those best performers. The business is going to struggle. Okay, so there's a great opportunity for the HR team here to say, how do we make a real difference in our organization? What are the things that we can bring in that are not necessarily unique to us, but that drive what we believe as a business? Okay, that are consistent with our culture, consistent with where we want to go to. Okay, and that all ties together and makes a difference. So don't just be like the Joneses. What's going to be different for us? So HR Talk's happy to help you with that journey. So we work with employers to map out what works for them. So what are we trying to achieve? Okay, why is this important for us? Okay, what's the mix of benefits that might work for that, and what's the cost? Okay, what can we afford? What do we, if we don't want to add cost, what are the things that we can do simply? Okay, how do we just improve communication, for example? How is it best to implement that in the right way? How do we train and communicate staff? How do we train staff, and how do we communicate to staff about the benefits? Okay, and then how do we monitor and educate? So it comes back to that story I talked about, the health insurance. Okay, sorry, about the employee assistance program. How do we make sure that our staff are always aware of the things we're doing for them? And when I say avoid moral hazard here, is we don't want to be in a situation where these things are abused. So how do we make it so that they achieve what we design them to do, rather than creating an environment where people are using them for the wrong reasons, and then we lose the impact. Okay, so if we can help you think through these things, please let us know. Hopefully there's a little bit of food for thought there in terms of things that you might want to look at in your organizations. Maybe you have some examples of things that have actually worked well for you. I know the working from home one has been particularly interesting over the last couple of years, as we've seen the impact on some organizations where it's been great in some, very difficult in others. But it's also taught us a little bit about individual employees and who's able to function remotely and those that struggle. Okay, so even as you roll out these benefits, or if you look at these benefits, realize that they're not always going to be perfect, and it's an iterative process to find out what fits for you best. So thank you very much for your time today. Candice, I don't do many of these things. I don't know, how do you deal with questions?
Okay, so we're going to open it up. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. We can unmute you, or you can pop it into the chat box or the Q&A section. So the floor is open.
Okay, well, if there are any other questions that you think of later, please just pop us an email at info@hrtalk.co.za, or to one of your contacts at HR Talk, and we'd be happy to talk through it. But thanks very much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your week, and all the best.